Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We are coming to you virtually from Seattle, the PNW, the Pacific Northwest. And today we have one of our favorite co-hosts from the Bay Area. Linda's coming to us from the Bay Area. If you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this podcast is the podcast for you. I like to call it the podcast of record. This is where street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today is Linda Popke. Linda's coming to us from the Bay Area. Linda, welcome. We'll be to you in just a minute. We are really excited to have our guest today, Rachael Kim. Rachael founded Project Untaboo. Untaboo is a trusted period marketplace and community for individuals to discover and empower their period lifestyle. Welcome, Rachael. We will be coming to you in just a minute. Listen, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. Linda, what are we?
We are ubiquitous.
We are ubiquitous. One of my favorite words. And now everybody knows that because I say it all the time. Hey, listen, we come to you from about a dozen cities and we're growing. Of course, we're in Atlanta, Boston, Boca Raton, brand new in Knoxville and Columbus, and I think coming soon to New York. So check out all of us, but make sure that you are rating and reviewing ours. Now, listen, before we bring on Rachael, Linda, hello, how are you? And happy post-Thanksgiving.
Oh, I'm great, Dan, and same to you. I hope you've recovered from all the turkey and stuffing and on the football games and all that stuff.
Well, listen, we are a duck taco family. We did duck taco on Thursday. I made it. We did have turkey the next day at our daughter Mindy's house. So I guess we had some duck and some taco, or duck and some turkey. You know what is interesting that people should know is that you and I are in a collaboration. Besides the podcast, I am almost done writing my new book, Back Nine Walking, A Guide to Living Unleashed, and you are editing it. I'm really excited. Have you started reading any? Have you started the process yet?
Oh, I'm excited too. I just started looking at it last night, and it's just fascinating because you're combining stories about your life and anecdotes with information that's useful. So I'm going to really enjoy editing this, and I think it's going to be a fantastic book, and it's going to come out fairly soon.
How is my grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure so far? Am I getting an A or am I at a C minus?
So far, you're probably about a B plus A minus, which is really good.
You know what?
That's good.
I lived in B plus in high school. B plus is exactly where I can be. So listen, thank you for doing that work. I'm excited to get the book out, and everybody, you can go to back9walking.com and get on the wait list. It'll be out before Christmas. But what's out right now is our guest, Rachael Kim. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being on. And, I guess I'm going to lead off with a question. I'm just going to piggyback. Linda and I have been doing some collaboration. Business is about collaboration. Who do you collaborate with?
Well, I would say one of our closest collaborators with Project Untaboo has actually been for over a year is Ladybox, and they have a period care subscription box. So as you mentioned, Untaboo is a marketplace, but an educational area. Now we're in the midst of development, but what we've been able to do is work with other Femtechs to assess period care products. Because if you look at the Femtech category, there's, about 28 billion, it's worth 28 billion a year. It's only going to grow to, 50 billion in 2025, which means there's a huge emergence of just products across the board, which is great. But it's all about personalizing it, right? Like life isn't sedentary anymore. Everybody has their own different lifestyle, which is where we pull that in. And so curating and personalizing the best version, right, which is really about health, is what we're seeking. So We actually just launched a 7-day period week advent calendar box with Ladybox. So we research everything from the sustainability aspect, if they're women-owned businesses, BIPOC, customer ratings across the board to really curate a different and discover a different set of products that you could potentially use. So that's our latest collaboration.
That's fantastic. And it's wonderful. So I've got a question, Rachel. How did you come about to create this company? What made you decide to go in this direction?
So I think that's a multi-layered question. First and foremost, for me, equity or equality has been a driving theme in my life. I spent 10 years in tech working for one of the top global tech companies and, doing their data strategy, and actually specialized in, I would say, a more niche area of information security and data privacy. And especially being female as well, I would say there's not many of who I saw were like myself. So after 10 years of that, worked out of Chicago and London, coming out of college, I took a break. I literally needed to, I burnt out. I was a senior manager at that time, and I needed to take care of myself physically, mentally, emotionally. And, that lifestyle's great, but it's also really intense, to say the least. And I started traveling. So I traveled across 18 countries, 4 different continents, and a common theme and problem I had was just accessing period care products in the travel industry. One, you never know where it is. And 2, if you happen to get it on an airplane, maybe it's the pad that your mother or, that generation had, where it's a maxi pad in a box. And it really begged the question of, I've been in Accenture working across Fortune 100, 500 companies, seeing innovation in the consumer retail space, right? Where with clothing, food, drink, customization, innovation is applied. And then you have Femtech, which has been like this dinosaur of an industry dominated by, very big companies. And, what we can talk more a little bit later why. And it's one of those things where, it's a debilitating thing not having product. It's a debilitating not being able to take care of my health. And so when I came back, I talked with other backpackers as well, because I'm not the only one traveling. And it was a common theme. People wish they had product, on an airplane or on the bus or even at hotels where it's not embarrassing. And that really just intrigued my interest around, one, providing additional accessibility points, but then 2, actually looking at redesigning products themselves. Now, we, over time, due to COVID and the pivot, travel was down. We pivoted into just our market research section because I have a data background, data strategy background. And I think a lot of what's important for consumers is that transparency aspect. Like, you have to know in order to make a better choice, right? But how do you make that an easy experience? So we're currently going through stages of development for the Femtech area in the next few years.
Okay, so I've got to ask, because you've used the term several times, and I raised 2 daughters into adults, and so I have lived my life around females, but I've never heard the word or the term Femtech before, basically learning a little bit about you. Maybe there's other people out there listening or watching who might be saying the same thing. I think I understand what it is, but would you go deeper into the industry, and because you talked about how big of an industry it is, and then dive into what you said, there was only a couple companies that kind of dominated. So would you talk a little bit more about Femtech and what that means?
Yeah, so Femtech is a term coined by, there's a period care app called Clue. So Ida Tin actually coined the term, and that was in 2008. So it's, Femtech as a section of health tech has been around for a while. But I would say in terms of startup focus, investors, it's only within I would say in the last 5 years that term has been taking off and it's been used as buzzwords, and you see it more and more often, even in use in articles and media. Now, what is it really? It's really about it's anything, and there's it's the broad term. Femtech is really a broad term of cisgender or non-binary health, and normally it's been focused around reproductivity or fertility, but also just vaginal health. Now it can extend beyond that into just general health. So it's a broad term. There's many I would say, sub verticals in it. And the one that we sit in and chosen to start is that period care, right? But it's only a fraction of what this term actually encompasses. If you talk about what that industry is like, I mean, there's over 200 products now on the market, and sex health is also a part of that. And so, with that, the question is, well, how do I know which one's best for me? And now you see people flocking to TikTok to try and find, influencers who talk and try, right? Because it's interesting. Period care, it's, vaginal health, that is the most sensitive and I would say receptive part of an individual's body, however they identify. And so to have to try a product that's uncomfortable or it hurts, I mean, there is a reaction where people don't try it again with the same product, right? So there's a lot of, I would say, risk aversion. And so how do you get people comfortable with products and new ideas? And a lot of it is content, education, and also my own self-discovery of being 35 and still having my period, and what we were taught for the one day in junior high, it just doesn't mix anymore. Because what we understand about cisgender females' bodies are, even down to physical education. The programs that are implemented in schools are based on the assumption that cisgender females are miniature men. And we know now from a health perspective with research, that's not true. There's a different set of hormones, but also, let's say at a younger age where they promote strength training for individuals, actually cisgender females' bodies, it's more about because they grow bones and less muscle mass, right? And we have more adipose tissue, that you should just have consistent exercise that, doesn't hit it hard, so to speak. And so with this information, I think there's been this huge influx of Femtech and this industry, the investment in it, I think has doubled over the last 2 years. So it went from, I think, about 775 million in investment in the startup space to 1.3 billion. Now you may think that's a big number, but in actuality, it's like not even 2% of all funding in startup space, right? And so whilst there's attention to health and digital health and Femtech, which is great, it's still an emerging area. And I can only see that growing and maturing over time, particularly in the next 5 years. I feel like it's a steep acceleration. And I'm, Al Jolin, so the CEO of Ladybox and some others, we're excited. We're excited that there is a focus, and the term was coined really to bring focus to the fact that cisgender female health wasn't a priority. And I think a book I highly recommend people to read is Invisible Women, because it uses data to articulate of how we're considered abnormal in the social structures that we are actually entering in.
So Rachel, I've got a question for you, because the name of the company is Untaboo. And for generations, talking about periods and those products was taboo. So you've got to deal with that, but you talked about funding and venture capital, et cetera. In my experience, very little VC funding goes to female startups to start with.
Yes.
But then I wonder, in the Femtech space where we're talking about this topic that used to be taboo, have you found that that's an issue for you or the other companies? How do you get around that? Because if you're a room full of male investors, they're not always wanting to talk about period products.
No, but I would say how a lot of femtechs, and there's a couple organizations help you, it's talking about data. So numbers don't lie, money doesn't lie. The fact that it's going to be at least a $50 billion industry in 2025, right? That's less than 4 years now, right? It's a little over 3, which that's in a timeline of which a lot of investors can see, right? It's not at 10 years. It's not like the 8-year mark. It's something that's relatively quick or at least halfway in their mindset. So when I talk to investors, if they happen to be male, a lot of it is trying to equate what they've seen and experienced, much like Dan, right? He mentioned he has 2 daughters. He's lived in this world. And so I would say they're not completely ignorant, but I think there's a certain mystique that they have around it. And so what's been surprising about my journey is when I talk to other men, whether they be investor or not, is when they start finding things out, they're like, oh, really? Like, I didn't know that. And that's just it. They also weren't taught, what happens to a cisgender female's biology. And when we talk about education or sex education, as well as just general health for adolescents, that transparency, I think, is necessary, right? So just that cross-pollination, because it's, it was very much, cisgender females go one way, boys go another, and you never know what happens to everybody else. We don't live in that society anymore. And it's interesting because I would say the Gen Zers, they use TikTok, and it's not only females I see who are doing these TikToks or non-binary individuals. It's also boyfriends and males who actually show it from another perspective of, how they're curious, or like what their experience is like with their partner, right? And so it opens a different kind of dialogue that didn't exist before.
Well, we have to go into some dialogue that does exist. We got to pay the bills, Rachel. We're going to take a short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Rachael Kim, for our Hot or Not section of the show, I'm going to ask her about my favorite food. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
I'd love to write a book or publish a book, but I don't have the time. Does this sound like you? Maybe you have a compelling story to share or valuable advice for clients and prospects. If only you could get the story into a published format. Think you don't have time to write a book? Think your writing isn't polished enough to get your message across? Think this all sounds too overwhelming? Think again. At Leverage to Market Associates, we help aspiring authors transform a great book idea into an attractive published work. If you've written most of your book, we can help you edit your work and drive it through the production process. If you're not sure where to start, we'll coach you through the process to organize your thoughts and create a compelling book outline. And if you're just not comfortable writing a book yourself, we can ghostwrite this for you too. Contact us at leveragetomarket.com for a complimentary evaluation of your nonfiction book concept today and bring your book to life.
Okay, well, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Linda Popke, and we are here today with our guest is Rachael Kim from Untaboo. And our next segment is Hot or Not, and I want to find out what Dan's absolute favorite food is.
Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you, obviously, Linda, I listen to the commercials, don't I? I listen to the commercials because you're helping me with the editing. So before I reveal my favorite food, Rachael, Hot or Not is where Linda and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about periods, about a whole bunch of other things. And then you're going to tell us whether the concept or topic is hot or not and why or why not. And at the end, you win absolutely nothing, but let's hope you have some fun with it. So look, if I had a final meal, if I was said, this is going to be your last meal, what's it going to be? It's going to be pancakes. I love pancakes. I love chocolate chip pancakes. I love blueberry pancakes. I love pancakes with syrup. I love pancakes with butter. I love pancakes with peanut butter. All of those. But I'm going to ask you about a specific pancake, if it's hot or not. So Rachael, hot or not? Kimchi pancakes.
Definitely hot. I think, growing up, you just listed dessert. Your last meal was all dessert. So my kimchi pancakes are a proper dinner. They're an appetizer. They can be anything that you want, snack.
Wait a second. Hold on. Are you telling me I can have kimchi pancakes for dinner?
Yes.
Oh.
A lot of my friends request that from me. It's one of the most requested things that I make when I host. So for me, it's always been hot.
Well, listen, you're going to get an email from me after requesting, because I know what's for dinner. I'm going to have those for dinner. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm looking forward to it. Linda, you got next.
Okay, so Dan mentioned he's writing his book, and he's always got Captain Jack, his dog, and I've got my dog Mocha. So hot or not, having dogs and raising dogs, Rachel, what do you think?
Definitely hot, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I just got done. We're about to sell 8 Frenchie puppies. So one, I have acquired a puppy over that time. I was originally supposed to be just an auntie, so just helping my sister raise the 8 surprise puppies because apparently the sonogram only saw 4. So that was real. We were all surprised. And I would say, it's been an incredible journey, but I think animals are probably one of the most honest beings on earth in terms of their EQ and how you are, and actually patience, right? I think, I definitely think animals and puppies make you grow as a person. So always hot for me, always.
All right,
My dogs are very honest about when they're hungry. There is no doubt about that. They're very honest about that and loud. Okay, so Rachel, hot or not, the subscription-based model for business?
Hot, and I say as long as it's intentional. So when you go into the startup space, there are these different business models that they tell you to choose because they're lends itself to be successful. And I think for us in working with Aldrolin, doing things like every 3 months, every 6 months, being able to curate and support other businesses as well as social impact causes, for me is really key around that subscription box, because a lot of feedback that we get from customers is, they're used to that model. They're bored of that model. And so they will cut you out of that model or their lives unless it's meaningful. And I think that's great because, during COVID, we've shifted into mass consumerization and, with Cyber Monday sales and whatnot. But people have bought less, right? I think they are more intentional about resources. And really that's been, one of our core drivers is that sustainability, just being and very cognizant, right, of the resources that we use and provide, because if it's not meaningful, there's no point of having it, in my opinion. So hot, but with a caveat is it's best if it's intentional.
Great point. Great point. So here's another one. Hot or not, focusing on the US market and perhaps helping getting free products into public schools, or thinking globally where a number of countries, girls can't go to school during their period because they don't have the right supplies. So what's hot and what's not there?
They're both hot, but I think one is hotter than the other because you have to set an example. So, my experience in consulting is it's great to have that global strategic vision, but you also have to have a set example that works to be able to roll that out. So, in the rest of the world, actually, you already see, Scotland, New Zealand offering period care products, and even parts of Africa now. And I think there's dedicated programs like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that help focus within that area. So it's not that there isn't enough support. I think the U.S. market is a very influential market. And in terms of being able to roll out education with schools and policy makers, and supported by insurance, and I think if you can start shifting the system that way, for me, that is hotter, right, than the global vision. Because if you can't do that for one country, how can you really do it for others?
So, that leads me to thinking a little bit about what you just said and what you talked about earlier. You mentioned that getting health education in junior high, right? Linda and I, when we got it in junior high, it was like the 70s, right? I mean, it was a completely different conversation then. And I just wonder, pardon me?
It was very short conversation.
It was a very short conversation and really uncomfortable. And then they'd say, well, okay, all the girls go to home ec, right? All the guys went to shop, all the women went to home ec. Things have changed dramatically. And I'm curious from a generational standpoint, I'm in my mid 50s. I raised two girls. Our Rotary Club does a lot of work around this topic with helping organizations in Africa. I feel like I've got a fairly good sense of it, but I'm unique in the fact I think that maybe I've been surrounded by so many women in my life. From a generational standpoint, though, is that still a challenge from an education? From talking to 20-year-olds to talking to 50-year-olds to talking to 70-year-olds, what's the challenges that you're still trying to overcome?
So there is some generational challenges. So especially particularly, I would say millennials, elder millennials, I'm in that bracket. We're in that transition phase where we were taught, for a couple days. So similar to your generation, but even to talk about it was either with someone you trusted or very hush hush. And it's only over time where we're starting to see this emergence within society where it's, even with like Period, End of Sentence, that short film that won the Oscar, to, Padman, like the fact that there are now big media that's talking about it, I think shows that there is an openness now, that it's still in pockets, right? Pockets of goodness, but it's a little bit wider than when I went to school. Now, is it still a difficulty? Yes. So it's interesting because during COVID, there is a local middle school. I knew the assistant principal at the time, and she was just like, look, I have, individuals who are in between like 11 and 14, and they need to know more, right? They want to know more, but they're super shy. Can you do a session? And so I was really lucky to have an OBGYN who's also female. We both ran a session with them. So the way that we reached this audience was starting with memes, how selecting a meme of like, what describes your period? And there's so many, right? But just to be able to enter with humor and also talk about how periods were talked about with us at our age, and then having those group discussions and being able to create that bond. That's really what people are seeking, I would say, at that age is, is there someone else I can talk to? And not every, people assume that parents are sort of the go-to. Not necessarily the case. When we've done studies or spoke with customers, they go to their friends first, then their family, then social media, then doctors. That is the order of information that people go through,
yep.
Right? Of which, if you think about scientifically, that doesn't make sense, but it is all about comfort. And so how do you create these pockets where people can feel open and talk about it without being embarrassed, but also understand that they're not going to be judged? Or maybe the fact that what is considered normal or abnormal, it's okay, their body is theirs and they just operate differently, right? There's a saying that I have where every cycle isn't the same, everyone's period isn't the same. So even with an individual, my cycle from month to month, it can change based upon stress, right? And there's research that backs this. So just being able to open a world of variance and that people are okay, but also understanding there's, trusted resources and people to talk to, definitely, I would say, is something that educators are struggling with, right? I think that the way that they currently approach it is probably still how we were taught, very academically, a little matter-of-factly. And in this space, you need to have the data and the EQ, I think, to really educate and transform people's lives, because it does affect everything. And it's not just middle schoolers. Precocious periods are as early as 7 now. So you're talking about individuals in elementary school. So yeah, those are the couple of things that we've seen during COVID, and sort of how we've tackled that. And we've seen that resonate.
Great. I'm going to go a little bit differently here, because you've got a startup that you started in Seattle. So I want to ask you, and I'm the person in Silicon Valley here, so I'm not in Seattle. Hot or not, Seattle for starting and growing a startup like yours?
Hot to start. I think, what sold me coming back from traveling around the world for a year was just the community. There are very supportive communities. At that time, WeWork Labs, there was a members labs and I've met so many founders who I'm still really good friends today, and who are, we support each other today from that group. And if I hadn't seen that, that network and the accessibility to it, I probably would have been stuck at home still with the idea of doing nothing, right? And I know, coming from consulting background, is like, how do you get things together, a network, people, resources, where you can actually realize or see a path. And I would say, before I came to Seattle and met the startup community here, I didn't see a path. I had an idea, but I feel, there's so much knowledge here. I think it's great. I do think from an investment standpoint, they're not very consumer focused yet, even though you have Starbucks, Amazon. I would say B2B and SaaS still rule here for the time being. And so, Silicon Valley, LA, Miami, New York, I would say they're more mature in terms of the consumer focus and getting rapid response, but also the investment. And that's something that we're looking towards next year in terms of actually being able to tap into those networks. We know people, but just being able to grow in the next stage, right, of from pre-seed to seed. So.
Well, speaking of next stages, our next stage has hit the next short break to hear from our corporate sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, Rachael Kim, for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to find out what she can teach me about raising daughters. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors: Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, and the Kitsap Sun newspaper. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcasts.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
Okay, we're back. Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where again, we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Linda Popke, and we are here again with Rachael Kim of Untaboo. And now we get to do this kind of fun segment called Plead the Fifth. So,
and before we dive into Plead the Fifth, I do want to make a kind of a grand announcement. We have a new corporate sponsor as of today. And so I wanted to give a special shout out, Brett Clark and BC Fitness Studio, a former guest. In fact, I think he was a guest in February or March, is now officially one of our corporate sponsors. So many thanks to Brett Clark and BC Fitness Studio. Though he's based out of Silverdale, he does work everywhere, all over the world. He does work virtually as well. So you'll be hearing a lot more about Brett and BC Fitness, but thank you for coming on. So Plead the Fifth. I don't know if you brought your attorney with you, Rachael, but you're going to have to make up your own mind. You only get to plead the fifth once. And I mentioned maybe you could have, I probably should have been listening to you 20 years ago or so, but you're probably too young there. You're about my daughter, you're about my daughter's age. But Plead the Fifth. How can parents help their daughters break through the gender barrier?
Ooh, I think the first and foremost thing is building their confidence and the enable space for identity formation. We all talk about imposter syndrome and just taking periods as an example, when you're told like once a month it's okay not to participate in life, right? But for me, I think confidence is a really big thing. It would address a lot of personal and professional issues that we see persisting today. Why women don't go up for promotions as often. Why are people able to position themselves like in the market? And that confidence, honestly, I grew up as a tomboy, first of all. So I think if I didn't have some of that spunk, my life would have gone differently. I don't think I would have been as successful. I think it would have gone a different path. So that self-acceptance, that space for identity formation, which can contribute to mental wellness as well as physical wellness. I think that's a really big thing for me.
So Rachel, I think that I am completely in agreement with you on confidence. And I want to ask really a quick follow up on that. And I think about it because Barb and I have two granddaughters. So girls are the story of my life. That are very young, and confidence is something we want to instill. Do you have suggestions? Because that can be sometimes hard. How can adults, especially important adults in the life of girls, young girls to teenagers, what are some ways that they can actually do that? How can they inspire confidence?
The kind of confidence that I would say I consider healthy is, if they do something amazing, or how they think, or even just trying, right? Pushing the ability to try, and it's okay to fail and then succeed later on. So I would say, if they're little girls, just really appreciating what they do. I know it's really easy to say, oh, you're so pretty, or, a lot of how we're judged socially is by the outside. And I think if you can, and it's hard, right? It's the language, it's the mannerisms, but structuring confidence in a way it's of where, it's who they are and what they do, I think is a really great way of doing that. And I think in terms of teenagers, it's really giving them that space to form that identity, but also being there to talk, and just understand, just building that trust. Never easy. I'm an auntie, right? So definitely seeing the teenagers, and but it's trying to meet them where they're at. And so this is where I brought up TikTok so many times now. It's an interesting phenomenon for me, seeing that all this information, because that resonates with them, right? Being able to have short pieces of content in a language that they can understand, and they can understand the impact. I think empowering choice at that stage is really key, because they're not going to rely on you forever. The point is, at least from my view, is enabling them being, a full human being and an adult later on, where they can thrive. And so understanding choices and enabling them and then supporting them, I think, is really key at that stage.
Great. That's useful. Absolutely. I have a daughter too, so I can absolutely relate to that. Lots of girls here, lots of girls. So here's a question for you. What kind of strange experiences did you have on this 10-month solo backpacking journey? Tell us what the strangest thing that you kind of encountered during that time you were off trekking.
I would say it was, and it's because it's the biggest one in my life, or the only time where I've solo traveled and I felt I was unsafe. So at the tail end of my trip, I was backpacking through Cambodia, and just by myself. And you meet people along the way, but there's a place by the forest in central Cambodia called Battambang. And you go there because there's killing caves, but also they have bats. There's also this famous railroad that you can, the old school, where you can actually, they pump it and you can go along. And I guess it's weird, but I was being followed for several days. And so I'm very, I believe in being a savvy traveler. I'm cautious, but I'm not overly cautious, but it's just being aware. And for me, the most bizarre was just being able to be followed for multiple days to and from my hostel, to the point where it's the only time that I cut my trip short and actually flew back to Ho Chi Minh, right? So I would say for me, that's probably the weirdest experience that I've had. In all honesty, anything else has been, but also everything was learning experience, but everything else during that time, it made me appreciate humanity again. I think it's really easy to be jaded when you're burnt out. And so, yeah, I just have a massive appreciation and a big smile when I think about that trip. But that's probably the one event that stuck out where I would say it gave me a little bit of a creepy vibe.
So, Rachel, I've been asking this question all year of all of our guests, and I know you've listened to at least a couple of the shows, and hopefully you'll listen to all of them moving forward. But we've been asking the same question because I think we're going to compile them at the end. Let's just say I'm making you start a new business, and it has nothing to do with what you're doing now, and you have to start that business or create it from a hobby. What's the hobby and why?
Ooh. So many hobbies. All right, so I'm going to tell you one that that a lot of my friends have told me during COVID I should do. So I love baking and making mulled wine. And so for me, I think cooking is my way of showing love. So part of my love language. And that sort of is what the extra spice is. So I would say if I was to think about a passion, because food is universal, right? Food bonds people. And for me, it'd be food. In all honesty, I think having like a bakery or a business that's focused around that locally, you see a lot of them in Seattle that do really well. And it's because there's this charm about the personality or the family. And I think, yeah, for me, food is a big thing. So,
well, if you open up that kimchi pancake food truck, I'm there.
You know what? If you ever come to Seattle, I will cook for you. How about that?
There you go.
Now
There's
you've
your
done it.
offer. Now I have to come
Now
to
you've
Seattle.
done it, because that sounds like a deal.
All right, I'm going to ask you, because we're talking about food. You're at a dinner party and there's all kinds of people you don't know. Who do you want to be seated next to? Who would you want to, that you haven't met? And what is it you're going to ask them?
I've been in many situations like that, and I never have a preference of who I'm seated next to, because I just see it as an opportunity. It's sort of like a gambling, if you're gambling in life, like, let's just see how it goes, right? So that mentality going in. If the food is out, because as I said, I'm a foodie, I normally be like, oh, I can't wait to taste this. Like, what are you thinking, or what do you think would be your favorite? Because it's also very revealing on people's preferences, right? And it gets straight into about them, and not about, the common questions like, oh, what do you do? I think especially in Europe, that's like that question is pushed back in conversation a little bit later. I think in coming back to the US, I've seen it being one of the top 2 questions that you're asked, and I find it boring, right? I think it's common, and it's necessary at some points, but to really get to know people and connect with them, food is one of my things. So understanding what they like, are there places that they love to eat? Like, are there any recommendations? That kind of thing, because that's when you just start getting into an area that people love to talk about. It's easy, but yeah, you can start really engaging on a different level.
Great, that's fantastic. So now we're all hungry. Okay, but Rachel, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. And for our listeners that want to get in touch with you and find out more about you and more about Untaboo, where should they go?
Well, currently, I would say our best bet is our Instagram. So it's at @myuntaboo. And we also have a link that we'll share a little bit later on to our advent calendar. And then actually by email. So Rachael@projectuntaboo.com.
That's fantastic. And to everyone listening, make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, wherever you get your podcast, iHeart, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, because damn, we are ubiquitous. Okay.
Well, you know what? I turned off my mic. We're ubiquitous.
You're ubiquitous. There we go. He was speechless for a second. Okay. Follow us also on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Rachel, thank you for coming. We're really, really thrilled to have you. Great conversation. And I'm going to hold you to the kimchi pancakes. I promised you that. I'm going to hold you to that. Linda, as always, thank you. Looking forward to working together on the book, and we'll let everybody know when that comes out. For all of you on Facebook, or if you're not on Facebook yet, please go like us there, because this is where we live stream every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, high noon. Our next guest is going to be on Wednesday, December the 8th. That guest will be Colin Hathaway. Colin is with Southwest Plumbing. You probably all got that jingle in your head on Southwest Plumbing. We're going to be talking to Colin about his business. Our co-host for that week will be James Alberson. So until next week, everybody, please be safe, be well, be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond.